Out here in the Wild West, a man's past rides with him.
"You're too late," she said. The cowboy replied, "Not for love. You ever realize you loved someone only when you saw them giving up on you out here in the West? Nothing cuts deeper than being late for the only heart that ever believed in you." The sun was sinking over Red Valley when Emily Hart stood at the chapel door, bouquet trembling, breath unsteady. She wasn't walking into a marriage she wanted. She was walking away from a love that had broken her one too many times. And then the dust rose. Jack Callahan rode hard out of the fading light, covered in trail dust and months of regret. He stopped in front of her, chest heaving, eyes burning with a truth he'd carried too long. She whispered, "You're too late." He answered softly, "Not for love, not for you." Before we begin, take a moment to comment the name of your city. Where are you watching from tonight, and when the story ends? Don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Sunset poured over Red Valley. Wyoming like the last streak of fire at the end of a long day, washing the ridge of mountains and the dusty road in a deep, burning red. Dry wind hissed across the old wooden roofs, carrying the scent of sun-scorched wild grass and the faint echo of distant hoofbeats. The whole town fell into a heavy stillness, as if the land itself was waiting for something to break. In front of the aging chapel, where the wooden doors had weathered half away with time, Emily Hart stood motionless. Her faded blue dress clung to her slender frame, the wind tugging at the hem, or perhaps she was the one trembling. Her eyes were swollen from sleepless nights. In just a moment, she would have to walk inside, to marry a man she had never loved, bound by a debt that tightened around her life like a noose. Emily lowered her head, her voice barely more than a whisper. If he cared, he would have come sooner. No one answered her. Only the chapel bell responded, calling her in, urging her to surrender to her fate. And then, from the far end of the dusty road, a sharp, ringing neigh split the silence. Dust exploded. Red earth swirled into a rising storm. A lone horse shot forward. Jack Callahan, the solitary cowboy who had vanished from Red Valley 9 months earlier, carrying a guilt he never dared confess, and leaving Emily's heart cracked behind him. Now he returned, his sunburned face streaked with road dust, his dark eyes filled with the raw ache of a man who had walked through hell just to find his way back. Emily turned toward him, but the hope in her gaze was long gone. She only stood there exhausted, resigned, holding on to the last pieces of her pride. Jack pulled the reins, swung off the horse. He said nothing. He only looked at her with the eyes of a man who knew he had come late, far too late. Emily lifted her chin, her voice cold, cutting straight into the deepest part of him. "You're too late." Desert wind swept through, carrying her words away, but it couldn't erase the wound they carved across Jack's face. He took one step, then another. The chapel door creaked behind Emily, a thin wooden barrier dividing them on one side. A life she was forced into, and on the other, a second chance flickering like a candle about to die. Jack stopped at that fragile boundary, his voice hoarse, dry like the western wind. Late for everything, but not for love. In that moment, the whole town seemed to hold its breath. The sunset still burned red, the wind still blew, but time itself stopped, leaving only two people, two hearts once closed, facing each other at the edge of ending and the beginning of hope. And the chapel door remained open. Part 1. Emily wants to forget a wounded heart The next morning, Red Valley was wrapped in a pale gray light, as if yesterday's sunset had drained every last bit of color from the sky. Low clouds pressed down on the land, heavy like the heart of the young woman standing inside a small wooden cabin by the pine woods, the place Emily Hart had lived for all of her 24 years. The cabin, once warm and familiar, felt strangely cold. A pot of coffee sat on the table, long since cooled. Its stale scent mingled with the smell of damp wood, filling the room with the quiet fatigue of forgotten mornings and abandoned dreams. On the roof, a lone bird called out again and again, but no other bird answered. The whole world seemed to shrink around Emily. She was no longer wearing the wedding dress, just a thin white blouse and a faded brown skirt. Her hair fell loosely over her shoulders, not tied up the way she usually wore it. The dark circles under her eyes showed she hadn't slept at all. Even though Jack had appeared at the chapel the previous evening, even though his words had shaken the whole town, Emily still didn't know what any of it meant. Maybe it meant nothing at all. Maybe it really was too late. On the bed, a small suitcase lay open. Emily folded each piece of clothing with practiced hands, though her heart felt hollow. She was preparing to leave Red Valley after the wedding, or after whatever that unfinished wedding had become. Aunt Martha tended the fire, glancing at her from time to time without saying a word. She knew there were wounds a person must face alone. The firewood crackled softly in the hearth. Its sound blended with Emily's faint sigh. She opened the last drawer. Inside was only one thing: the faded blue scarf Jack had given her 2 years ago. A small gift, but an entire world of memories. Emily froze. Her hand trembled as she touched it. The fabric was worn, but it still carried the faint scent of the wild grasses Jack had brought from the open fields. She remembered the day he gave it to her, snow falling, winter deep and quiet. Jack had said nothing. He had simply wrapped the scarf around her neck and murmured, "Wind's strong today." Just 2 simple words. But it was the first time Emily felt the quiet tenderness in him. Now, the scarf lay in her hands like a blade of memory. She swallowed hard, her breath uneven. She didn't want to take it with her. She didn't want to carry anything that belonged to Jack anymore. Outside, wind whistled through the cracks of the cabin door, stirring the curtains. Emily closed her eyes, tightened her grip on the scarf, and opened them again with the resolve of someone making a final decision. She stepped toward the fireplace. The small flame flickered weakly, much like her heart. Emily knelt, bringing the scarf close to the fire. The flame touched the fabric, turning the edges black, curling them into thin smoke. Her chest tightened with pain so sharp it stole her breath. "Burn," she whispered, voice raw. "Burn away, so I can forget him." But as the fire reached the center of the scarf, a tear fell, then another, then many more, faster than she could wipe away. Her tears landed on the burning cloth, snuffing out the flame one small ember at a time. The half-burned fabric smoked briefly, then stilled, refusing to burn any further. Emily let out a soft sob, trembling like a lost child. No. She lifted the scarf. It was only half destroyed, like her heart damaged, hurt, yet stubbornly holding on. Aunt Martha had come up behind her without a sound. Her old eyes softened. "My dear, there are things we wish to burn," she murmured, "but they never quite burn all the way." Emily bowed her head, tears falling onto the scorched threads. "I want to forget, Auntie. I want to forget him so I can start a new life. Aunt Martha placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Sometimes people leave because they think they're not worthy. Sometimes they return because their heart never truly left. Emily shook her head, forcing herself to stand. I don't believe anymore, Auntie. Not in him. Not in love. I just want to get away from here. She placed the half-burned scarf into the corner of the suitcase, as if punishing herself or punishing Jack. Outside the window, the sky remained gray, but a thin ray of light slipped through the clouds and fell directly upon the scarf in her hand. Emily stared at it for a long, long moment. Then she closed the suitcase gently. She had decided to leave Red Valley. But her heart, whether she wanted it or not, was still trapped somewhere in last night's sunset, where Jack Callahan stood in the red dust, saying the one thing she didn't dare believe, not too late for love. And that frightened her more than anything else. Part 2. Jack Callahan returns. The red dirt road leading into Red Valley stretched across the land like a scar, dry, lonely, and weathered, much like the man riding along it. The wind blew hard, kicking dust into gray spirals that clung to the worn leather jacket and frayed brim of Jack Callahan's hat. For 9 long months, Jack had drifted across Wyoming, taking whatever ranch work he could find, fixing fences, herding cattle, sometimes sleeping under the stars, sometimes in barns where the wind stabbed like needles. But not a single day passed without him thinking of the small town he'd left behind, and the woman he'd broken in the process. His gray horse. Ash tossed its mane and exhaled warm breath into the cold afternoon air. Jack lowered his head, running a hand along the horse's neck, as if trying to steady his own spirit. He thought his heart had hardened over the months. But when the outline of Red Valley appeared between the pines, his chest tightened painfully. He was coming back. Back home. Or at least, back to the place where he'd lost the one person who mattered. Ash's hooves struck the dry ground in steady rhythm, blending with the wind as it rushed through the rocks. Jack didn't hurry, but his eyes were sharper than usual, burning through the dust as if trying to glimpse the woman he had abandoned for 9 long months. As he approached the first hitching post at the edge of town, Jack slowed Ash to a walk. A few townsfolk glanced up, their eyes carrying the mix of skepticism and disdain reserved for a man who had disappeared without a word. Old Barton, keeper of the stables, recognized him first. He stepped out holding a cup of cold coffee, lifting a brow. Callahan, thought you were dead somewhere. Jack didn't smile, didn't answer. He simply nodded and tied Ash to the post. But Barton lowered his voice, glancing around as if afraid to be overheard. You picked a fine time to come back, though it's likely too late. A flicker of dread stabbed through Jack's chest. He turned sharply. Too late for what Barton stared into Jack's smoldering eyes, hesitated, but finally spoke. Emily Hart. The girl's getting married this afternoon. To Victor McGraw. In that instant, Jack's world shattered. Victor McGraw, the richest man in the region, and the cruelest. A man known for buying people's freedom, then crushing whatever pride remained. Jack had worked a summer on Victor's ranch long enough to see how the man treated those beneath him. Jack left and never looked back. Jack froze. Dust swirled around him as if the world had stopped. Then his breathing grew sharp, ragged. Emily! The woman he had loved so deeply that he ran from her, afraid he would only hurt her more. and now she was about to marry the most ruthless man in Red Valley. Jack's throat burned. He swallowed hard. Say it again. Barton sighed and looked down. Weddings this afternoon. Chapel. She doesn't want it. But Victor's holding her aunt's debt over her head. The words cut straight into Jack's heart. His hands turned cold. Then they began to shake, not from the wind, but from the guilt that had been festering inside him for 9 months. I should have, he whispered, lips trembling. I should have never left her. He gripped the reins so hard the leather cut into his palms. Blood surfaced. Ash neighed nervously, sensing his anguish, but Jack didn't loosen his grip. He needed the pain, a reminder that his cowardice had led Emily to this. Wind kicked dust into his face, but he didn't wipe it away. His dark blue eyes locked on the distant chapel, where faint bells drifted through the air. Wedding bells. Bells of loss. Bells announcing he had come too late. Jack swung onto Ash in one motion. He yanked the reins so hard the horse reared and snorted, foam at its lips. But for once, Jack didn't soothe him. He leaned forward, voice nearly a broken plea. No. I won't let this happen. And without another heartbeat of hesitation, he dug his boots into Ash's sides. The horse surged forward. Dust exploded behind them like a rising storm. Wind whipped Jack's face as he rode, but all he saw in his mind was Emily, her sad eyes, her trembling lips when she said his name. The pain he had caused. In the pounding thunder of hooves, a vow escaped him, choked, desperate, but clear as the wind. Emily, and no matter how late I am, I will find my way back to you. Red Valley grew larger on the horizon, but to Jack, it wasn't just a town anymore. It was the place where he had to confront his past and fight for the woman he should have never, ever let go. Part 3. The Cold Encounter. Rowena's general store was usually the noisiest place in Red Valley, but that afternoon, the moment Jack Callahan stepped through the worn wooden doorway, the entire room fell silent as if someone had reached up and switched off every sound. The wind chime above the entrance clinked once, then stopped. Everyone inside the old Cowboys sipping bitter coffee, the flour-dusty shopkeeper, the 2 children playing with a tin of nails turned to look at him. Not with joy, not with warmth, but with the kind of gaze a town gives a man who has come back far too late. Jack's leather coat was covered in road dust, the brim of his hat shadowing half his face. But no one could mistake those dark blue eyes, the same eyes that once made Emily Hart smile through an entire summer. Rowena raised an eyebrow. Jack Callahan. Thought Red Valley would never see you again. Jack gave a small nod. I just need to buy a few things. His voice was low, rough, carrying the fatigue of long miles. No one answered him. They simply watched, then looked at one another, as if bracing for whatever was about to happen. The back door creaked open. A whisper of fabric brushed the floor. Jack recognized the footsteps before he even dared turn around. Emily. She stood in the doorway, long brown skirt, crisp white blouse, her hair tied loosely at the back of her neck. It was the same image he had carried with him through 9 months of wandering. But her eyes no longer held the softness that once terrified him with how much he felt. They were tired now, guarded, as if she had closed every door in her heart. Emily froze when she saw Jack. The hand holding a small sack of flour trembled just slightly, but enough for Jack to notice. The entire store held its breath. No one dared interrupt the moment, Jack stood still, rooted to the wooden floorboards. Every part of him wanted to walk to her, call her name, say the words he had swallowed for months that he was wrong, that he came back for her, that he should have never left. But his throat tightened. No sound came out. Emily said nothing. Jack said nothing. Between them lay too many unfinished moments, too many unasked questions, too many wounds neither had been brave enough to face. Their eyes met. In her gaze, Jack saw every night she waited, every word she never got to say, every hope he himself crushed the day he disappeared without a goodbye. In his gaze, Emily saw the exhaustion of a man who had wandered too far, the regret that needed no explanation, and the shadow of the man she had tried and failed to forget. They stood there, among sacks of flour and shelves of oil lamps, like two ghosts staring at a life they once shared. No one spoke. No one dared disturb the fragile quiet. The townsfolk exchanged glances, then slowly slipped toward the back of the store, understanding that this moment was not meant for anyone else's ears. Emily was the first to turn away. Without a word, without a nod, without a greeting. She simply walked out of the store with a calmness so cold it was almost cruel. But when the evening sun hit her face, Jack caught the slight redness at the corner of her eyes, a sign only someone who had loved her would notice. Jack wanted to say her name, Emily, but the word jammed in his chest like a fresh wound tearing open. He stood there, watching her walk down the dusty street toward the chapel preparing for the wedding. Each step she took felt like another step on his heart. Rowena approached the counter and spoke quietly. "She's been through a lot, Jack." Her voice carried no accusation, only painful truth. "She waited for you. A long time." Jack closed his eyes. He saw the half-burned scarf. He saw her red-rimmed eyes the night before. He heard again the calm, broken words she'd said. "You're too late." He opened his eyes. Emily was already far down the road, her figure growing small in the blood-red sunset. The ache in Jack's chest didn't need shouting or breaking things. It burned quietly, steady, a wound that had never healed. He set his hand on the doorframe, fingers tightening until they turned pale, alone in the silent store. Jack Callahan finally understood something he should have realized long ago. Some wounds don't need words to be spoken. They tell themselves through a single look and through the heartbreak of someone walking away. Part 4. Emily is forced into marriage. Victor McGraw's grand house sat apart from the rest of Red Valley, towering like a fortress built from money and from the fear of everyone who lived under its shadow. Tall timber pillars, expensive roofing tiles, a horse stable larger than 2 family homes combined everything about the place spoke of a man accustomed to power, and even more accustomed to watching people kneel before him. That afternoon, wind swept past the white fences, carrying the scent of dry grass and the crack of a whip slicing through the air. Emily stood before the enormous front door, clutching the fabric of her skirt, her heart pounding wildly. She hadn't wanted to come here, but Aunt Martha had been summoned by Victor, and nothing good ever came from that. She stepped up the porch and knocked softly. A voice inside answered deep, cold, cutting like a blade through stone. "Victor McGraw, you owe me a significant debt. I've given you a full year. It's time to pay." Emily froze. She inched closer to the half-open door, but did not walk in. Through the narrow gap, she saw Aunt Martha standing before Victor's desk, her face pale. "Victor, the girl is only 24. Don't do this. Quiet. Martha, Victor slammed his hand on the table. You owe me 3 loans. You have no land, no cattle, nothing except that niece of yours. A chill crawled up Emily's spine. Aunt Martha trembled. She doesn't love you. She never will. Victor laughed, a rough, wet sound, like fire crackling over damp wood. Love, I don't need love. I need a quiet wife who knows her place. And you need your debt forgiven. The paper is right here. He placed the contract on the table, the paper promising Emily's hand. Emily pressed her hands over her mouth, stifling a gasp. Her fingernails dug into her palms until the skin broke. No. Aunt, don't sign, she whispered, but fear kept her from stepping in. Aunt Martha shook her head helplessly, tears swelling. Please, Victor, the girl still has a future, still has love. Victor cut her off. Love who Jack Callahan, the man who left for 9 months without a word. What did he expect that she'd keep waiting like a foolish girl? Emily bit her lip until she tasted blood. She couldn't move. She couldn't speak. Victor continued, voice dripping disdain. Jack isn't coming back, and even if he did, he couldn't keep her. A broke cowboy with no land, no future. What's he got besides those dreamy eyes? Life isn't built on dreams. Martha. Aunt Martha clenched her hands. I'm begging you, let her choose the man she loves. Love doesn't pay debts. Victor pushed the pen toward her. Sign, or you lose your cabin, your land, everything. The 2 of you will be out on the street. Emily stood outside the door, heart crumbling. She knew Aunt Martha had taken the loans for her sake. She couldn't let her aunt suffer more. Her hands shook so violently that blood dripped from her palm onto the floorboards. But she didn't feel the pain. The pain was somewhere else in the hollow Jack had left behind when he walked away. She swallowed her tears, forcing breath into her lungs. One thought spiraled through her mind. He won't come back. Those words used to hurt her. Today, they killed her. Aunt Martha finally broke into sobs. Emily, I don't want this for you. I don't want to force you. Victor leaned forward, voice sharp. You're not forcing her. I am. The girl has no choice. Emily stepped inside. The door swung open, and both Victor and Aunt Martha turned toward her. She stood at the threshold, pale, exhausted, but with eyes steady as steel. Aunt Martha gasped. Emily, you heard everything. Emily nodded. Her voice came out thin, fragile, but terrifyingly firm. You don't have to sign. Aunt, I agree. The room fell silent. The wind outside stopped. The air inside tightened like a noose. Aunt Martha burst into tears, clutching Emily. No, please don't accept this. I beg you. Emily shook her head, stroking her aunt's shoulder gently. I'm tired, Aunt. Tired of waiting for someone who will never be mine. Tired of hoping for things that aren't real anymore. I just want you to be safe. Victor smiled coldly, picking up the paper. That's right. Accept your fate. Emily Hart. You'll take the McGraw name, and this all ends here. Emily looked out the window at the blank gray sky. A single tear slid down her cheek. She accepted not out of love, but because her heart had lost faith in the only man it ever trusted. Inside her chest, a truth whispered a truth she didn't dare speak aloud. Jack, I waited for you. but you never came back. Part 5. Jack finds the truth. The Red Valley Saloon was drowned in a haze of cigarette smoke, thin as morning mist. The old wooden floor groaned with every step, and the smell of cheap whiskey mixed with the raspy laughter of a few half-drunk cowboys, making the whole room feel heavier than the air outside. Jack Callahan pushed the doors open. Instantly, every head in the saloon turned toward him. Not in welcome, not in curiosity, but with the look a town gives a man who has come back far too late. Jack took a seat in the shadowed corner, placing his wide-brimmed hat on the scarred table. His calloused hand trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the words Barton had stabbed into his mind like a rusted nail. Emily was going to marry Victor McGraw. Behind the counter, Laney spotted him. She let out a sigh, as if she had expected this moment all along. What'll it be? Jack whiskey, he rasped, voice dry as sand. And I need to know what happened to Emily. The room fell silent. A heavy man sitting near the oil lamp set down his drink and sighed. You really did come back late. Boy. Jack clenched his jaw, lifting his eyes. Why is she marrying him? A younger man dragged his chair closer, speaking quietly but clearly. She didn't want to. Everyone knows Emily cared for you. But her aunt owes Victor. And he. Another interrupted, voice deeper. She fought it. More than once. Victor wouldn't let go. The ceiling fan creaked, then paused for half a beat. Jack felt a wave of dizziness hit him like a fist. He forced the next words out, voice shaking. Did she ever ask about me? The oldest man in the saloon, Samuel, looked straight at him. His eyes were red, the eyes of someone who had watched this tragedy grow for too long. Jack, that girl waited for you through 3 seasons. The whole saloon went quiet. Even the wind outside seemed to hush. Jack bowed his head, his fingers closing around his glass. But Samuel wasn't finished. He needed Jack to hear the truth, no matter how much it tore him apart. In the spring, she went to the post office every week. In the summer, she spent her evenings at the town gate, said she was just walking. In the fall, when the first snow came, her aunt said she woke every morning looking toward the road you left on. Jack squeezed his eyes shut. Every word fell like a steel blade. The young man whispered. And one day, she stopped waiting. Said a man who leaves without a goodbye probably ain't planning to come back. Jack's eyes snapped open, burning red. His voice cracked. Who? Told her that Laney sighed from behind the counter. Everyone. The whole town figured you were gone for good. Then her voice softened. But Emily, she believed in you. Believed until it hurt. Jack didn't hear the rest. The fan creaked weakly. Someone's boots scraped the floor. Whiskey poured into a glass somewhere nearby. All of it blurred into a distant hum. Only one truth echoed in his skull. Emily waited for him through 3 seasons. He had run from Red Valley to escape his own feelings, to avoid hurting her, to avoid becoming a man unworthy of her love. But he never realized. It was his leaving that broke her hope. Jack set his hand on the table. It shook violently. Then he slammed it against the wood. Damn it. Everyone flinched. Blood trickled from his knuckles, a thin line, but sharper than any wound on his skin. It felt like his heart had cracked open again. He whispered, voice hollow. I made her lose faith. Laney shook her head. Jack, you're a good man, but good hearts don't build futures. Love doesn't stay still forever. and Victor. He pushed her into a corner she couldn't escape. Jack rose to his feet. He pulled his hat low to hide his eyes drowned in regret so deep he couldn't bear to show them. He stepped toward the door, each footfall heavier than thunder. As the saloon doors swung shut behind him, a man called out, "What are you gonna do now?" Jack didn't look back. His voice was steel. "Take back the woman I should have never lost." Then, he walked into the red dust to seek the truth, to reclaim hope, and perhaps to find the man he was meant to be. Part 6. The night before the wedding. The night before the wedding, the sky over Red Valley dimmed into a sorrowful shade of gray, like cold ashes spread across the horizon. Wind swept down from the western mountains, sliding through window cracks, carrying the faint scent of dry grass and the chill of an approaching night. In her small bedroom, Emily Hart stood before an old wooden mirror. She wore an ivory wedding dress, the only gift Aunt Martha had managed to save enough money for, so the girl wouldn't have to wear a rented gown. The fabric was light as breath, sleeves fitted neatly, delicate lace resting on her shoulders like a fragile blessing. But Emily's reflection held none of the radiance a bride should have, only silence, and a sorrow so heavy it bent her posture. Wind fluttered the thin white curtain, causing the candle flame on her table to waver. Shadows danced across the walls like restless spirits. Emily inhaled deeply, then stared at herself in the mirror. "I do." The words slipped from her lips, hollow and empty, like a whisper from someone who no longer believes in her own future. She tried again. "I do." Her voice cracked halfway. A tightness climbed her throat, forcing her to press a trembling hand over her chest just to breathe. The person in the mirror wasn't her. She looked like a woman trying to fit into a life she didn't choose, a woman pushed to the edge, preparing to accept a future without love, without hope. Emily closed her eyes. A memory surfaced, Jack walking away months ago, his back fading into a cloud of red dust, never looking back, never saying a word. Then another memory, him appearing at the chapel yesterday, eyes burned with regret, voice trembling like a man who had lost everything, late for everything, but never for love. A tear slipped down her cheek. She bit her lip, swallowing the ache. "Don't believe it. Don't believe it. Emily, don't you dare believe him again." But her heart betrayed her. Beside the flickering candle sat the half-burned scarf. The torn edge was blackened, eaten by flame. But the surviving half was still soft, still carrying the scent of dried meadow grass, the scent Jack had brought her the winter day he first gifted it to her. Emily picked it up. Her fingers brushed the charred edge cold, rough, like a memory scorched but stubbornly clinging on. She pressed the scarf to her chest. Her whole body shook. "I tried to forget you," she whispered, voice trembling like wind through brittle leaves. "Then why? Why does it still hurt this much?" A sob escaped her. She steadied herself, stared at the mirror, forcing strength into her reflection. She tried the line again. "I do." But at that moment, a sudden gust burst through the window. Whoosh! The candle died. Darkness swallowed the room. Emily froze. Her heart tightened painfully. No light. No warmth. Only darkness, cold, hollow, and lonely. Just like her heart. She sat down on the edge of the bed, the half-burned scarf falling into her lap. She looked toward the window where the wind kept blowing. Stronger now, as if it intended to tear the world apart. And she understood if that candle had just gone out. Her heart had gone out long before. It dimmed the day Jack left Red Valley without a word. And it died again when she learned the man she would marry wasn't the one she loved, but the one she was forced to endure. Emily pressed her hands over her face, stifling a cry. In the darkness, a question formed, one she didn't dare speak aloud. If you had come back sooner, would I be trapped in a life I never chose? But the wind outside answered with nothing but silence, a silence colder than any truth. And Emily knew, when morning came, she would put on that dress and walk into a wedding without love, because the only man she ever waited for came too late. Part 7. Jack faces the man she's about to marry. Sunset spilled over the McGraw Ranch like a sea of fire. Red light flooded the sky, poured across the wide dirt yard, and turned the white fences into a molten copper glow. Wind tore through the dry haystacks, whipping dust into spirals that slithered around the fence posts like the breath of some unseen beast waiting in the shadows. Jack Callahan rode Ash into the yard, each hoof step slow but charged with purpose. Beneath the brim of his hat, his dark blue eyes burned hotter than the dying sun. He wasn't running anymore, not from his past, not from himself, not from the man he used to be. Tonight, he came to face it all. Victor McGraw stood in front of the stables, whip in hand, long coat flapping in the wind. He was the kind of man born to command and even more used to watching others bow. He turned at the sound of hooves, and a crooked smile spread across his face the moment he saw Jack. Well, Callahan. His voice was rough, stretched out as if this were nothing but a game. I figured you'd show up. Jack dismounted without hesitating, without removing his gloves, without wasting a second. We need to talk. Victor laughed aloud, echoing bark filling the open yard. Talk about what? The bride is mine. What's left for you to say? Jack didn't answer. A few tense seconds passed. Wind rattled the metal sheets hanging on the barn, the sound sharp and cold. Victor stepped closer, eyes gleaming like a knife edge. She chose me, Callahan, because you didn't have the guts to keep her. The words hit Jack straight in the chest. He clenched his fists not out of anger, but because of the bitter truth in Victor's voice. Victor stepped in even closer, his words precise. Slicing you disappeared. She waited. She hoped. Then she finally understood you weren't coming back. I simply gave her a way out. Jack closed his eyes for a heartbeat. Pain tightened in his ribs, heavy and suffocating. Yes, it was the truth. The worst truth of his life because he was the one who caused it. But when he opened his eyes again, the fear was gone. What remained was a quiet resolve, the kind born from a man who has lost too much, yet still chooses to stand. Victor. Jack's voice was low, steady, unwavering. I'll ask you straight. Do you love Emily? Victor scoffed. Love. What would I want with love? I need a wife who stays in line. She's obedient, easy to control, and lucky to carry the McGraw name. Jack started to speak, but Victor cut in, voice dropping into a sneer. And what about you? Callahan, what do you have to offer her? Sad eyes, a warm embrace. You don't even have land to put your name on. Jack inhaled, slow, quiet. He knew Victor wasn't wrong. He had nothing. No land. No fortune. Only rough hands and a heart full of scars. But there was one thing Victor would never understand. Jack stepped forward, blocking the sunset behind him. Wind lifted the edge of his coat, scattering dust around his boots. He spoke clearly, each word carved from truth. Emily didn't choose you. Victor's eyes narrowed. What did you say? She accepted you, Jack replied, because her aunt owes you, because she thought I wasn't coming back, because she had no hope left. Victor went silent a moment, then smirked. Doesn't matter. She still chose me. You lost. Jack nodded, not with bitterness, but with a quiet, painful honesty. Yes, I lost. His voice didn't waver. I lost because I left her when she needed me most. Victor flicked his whip lightly. Then do yourself a favor and leave again. Stop making noise. Jack didn't move. His eyes were deep, steady, the eyes of a man finally ready to carry his own sins. Then he spoke, and the words fell heavy across the yard. Like an oath, Victor. If you ever hurt her, I swear I'll stand in her place. Not a threat. Not a challenge. A sacrifice, the vow of a man desperate to redeem what he broke. Victor stared at him, and for the first time, he realized Jack wasn't a beaten man. He was a man who would not run again. Jack turned, placed his hand on Ash's saddle. Before mounting, he spoke softly, but the burning sky heard every word. She deserves to be loved. And I'll do everything I can so she never has to suffer again. Then he rode out of the McGraw ranch, leaving behind the blazing sunset and Victor McGraw's calculating stare. A storm was coming. Everyone could feel it. But this time, Jack Callahan wasn't running from it. Part 8. The chapel's final hour at noon. The bells of the Red Valley Chapel rang in long, harsh echoes, bouncing off wooden rooftops and rolling down the red dust road. People from every corner of the town gathered, drawn by curiosity, as if they were about to witness something far more dramatic than a wedding, a marriage the bride did not want. The old pinewood chapel stood in the middle of the small square, its walls darkened by time, stained glass windows catching the sunlight like shards of fractured glass. Outside, the wind picked up, swirling dust and dry leaves, making the cross on the roof tremble. Inside, the wooden pews were neatly arranged. Whispers floated through the air. She looked so sad. Victor forced her. Everyone knows. And Jack, where's the boy now? Emily Hart stood behind the chapel door. She wore her ivory wedding dress, her face pale as if all the blood had drained from it. Her hands clutched a simple bouquet, a few wildflowers tied with a thin ribbon. But Emily's eyes held no light, no hope, only a hollow numbness. Aunt Martha adjusted her veil, though her hands trembled. Child, are you sure you won't call this off? I can still. Emily shook her head softly. No. Aunt, things have gone too far. Aunt Martha placed a gentle hand on her cheek, whispering, if your heart says no, don't force it. Emily looked into those weary eyes, then turned away, silent, because her heart had said no 100 times. But life had said yes, and life was winning. The chapel bell rang again. Emily drew one last breath and pushed the door open. The room froze. Every head turned toward her. Whispers died instantly. She walked down the aisle, each step heavy, the faded carpet muffling the sound of her shoes. Sunlight from the stained glass fell in streaks of red, gold, and green across her wedding dress colors far too bright for a day so bleak. Victor McGraw stood waiting at the altar, his usual arrogant smirk already formed. He looked at her the way a man looks at property, not at a bride. Emily didn't look at him, didn't look at anyone. She looked only toward the last pew, the seat where the only man she had ever loved used to sit whenever he attended Sunday service. The place she once believed he'd return to. The place she had hoped for until hope itself hurt. The seat was empty. No familiar cowboy hat. No dark eyes that made her heart tremble. No trace that Jack had stepped foot here at all. Emily stopped for a moment. Her bouquet dipped slightly in her hand. She pressed her lips together, trying to stay steady. But her heart worn thin, fragile, barely holding on, finally cracked. Her eyes burned. Her chest tightened. And the words she'd been trying not to think all morning sliced through her mind. He really isn't coming. She didn't speak it aloud, but in her mind, it echoed like a blade. Victor noticed her pause. He smirked, shrugging casually. Stop looking. Emily. He's not coming. A man who leaves once will leave twice. Emily closed her eyes. She knew Victor was lying, but the cruel part was her heart whispered the same thing. A tear slid down her cheek. She lifted her veil quickly to hide it. Aunt Martha, seated in the front pew, watched her with a heartbreak so raw it almost broke the room. But she also knew Emily had walked too far to turn back now. Emily moved again, each step heavier than the last. Every step felt like entering a cage, like walking into a life stripped of love. The bells rang again. Cold, long, indifferent. And when she stood at the altar, facing Victor McGraw, Emily understood that not only had the ceremony begun, the life she never chose was waiting behind that very door. And Jack still wasn't there. Maybe he would never be. Part 9. Jack arrives late. The evening wind in Red Valley rose like a warning, a storm rushing toward the town. On the red dirt road leading to the chapel, dust swirled in violent spirals, twisting like fire-struck sand. Through that storm of dust, a gray horse charged forward. Ash whinnied sharply, mane standing upright, hooves pounding the ground so hard that gravel blasted outward. On its back, Jack Callahan leaned low, his face set in grim determination, his eyes burning with a resolve he had never felt before. Every hoofbeat echoed the shattering of his heart. He was late, far too late for everything he should have done long ago. But the moment he heard the chapel bells ringing in the distance, he knew if he didn't reach Emily now, he would lose her forever. Wind screamed past his ears. Dust clawed at his skin. But Jack didn't slow. He drove his heels into Ash's sides, almost lifting the horse off the ground in one desperate leap. Ahead, the chapel roof appeared dark wood against a sky glowing like hot coals. The bells rang again. Long, heavy, final. Jack grit his teeth. No, don't you dare. He spurred Ash harder, hard enough that the horse cried out, but still raced forward. The chapel doors were closing. Jack saw two men pulling them shut, sealing the ceremony, sealing Emily's fate. He yelled, voice shredded by the wind, "Hold the door!" The men turned, startled, but Jack didn't wait. He tore into the chapel courtyard, red dust exploding around him, coating his coat and Ash's flank. Before the horse had fully stopped, Jack threw himself off, stumbling but catching his balance just enough to sprint toward the doors. Stop, wait. But the chapel bells drowned out his voice. Inside, Emily stood beside Victor, the minister's voice lifted, preparing the final vow. If anyone objects. Emily stood still, face pale, hands trembling around a bouquet of wildflowers. Her heart had gone silent last night now, only her body remained in the ceremony. She fought to swallow a sob, and then the chapel doors burst open. A gust of wind hurled red dust inside, lifting Emily's veil like one last breath before fate could close around her. Everyone turned. Jack stood in the doorway, coat covered in dust, hair whipped by wind, breath shaking, dark blue eyes glistening as if on the verge of tears. He didn't look like a hero. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a man who had run with his whole soul to keep from losing the woman he loved. Emily froze. She turned toward him slowly, almost fearfully, as if blinking might make him disappear. The first tear slid down her cheek. Then another. Her lips trembled. Her voice was small, yet the entire chapel heard it. "You're too late." The words cut into Jack like a blade. He stepped forward, each footstep weighted with 9 months of guilt. He didn't glance at Victor, didn't look at the crowd. His eyes belonged only to Emily, the woman he had hurt the most. When he reached a few steps away, Jack halted. He swallowed a broken breath, then spoke in a hoarse voice. Late for everything. The chapel held still. Even the wind outside seemed to stop. Jack inhaled deeply, and his eyes, once uncertain, once afraid, now shone with something pure, fierce, and unwavering, but not for love. A wave of silence swept through the chapel. Time stalled. No one moved. Even Victor froze. Emily brought a trembling hand to her mouth, tears streaming faster than she could wipe away. She stared at Jack as if he were something she had prayed for until her hope had burned out. Jack took one more step, standing beneath the colored light pouring through the stained glass window. Dust floated around him like a faint halo, the aura of a man who had come back from the dead. And in that suspended moment, the chapel fell into absolute silence. No breath, no whisper, only the echo of one truth, a truth that cracked open every heart in that room, not too late for love. Part 10. Emily chooses Jack's heart. The last light of day streamed through the stained glass windows of the chapel, casting glowing streaks of red and gold across the wooden floor, shimmering like fire, trembling like hope. The entire space seemed painted in sunset and forgiveness, a fragile radiance Emily's heart had not dared believe in for 9 long months. Jack stood there, breathless, chest rising and falling as if he had run back from the edge of the world. Red dust clung to his coat, while the stained glass light softened the rugged lines of his sunburned face, making him look like a man standing between guilt and redemption, one final chance. Emily stared at him. Her eyes were drowned with tears, spilling faster than she could blink. Victor clenched his jaw so hard the muscle twitched, but he didn't step forward. No one did. Because Jack's words, "Not too late for love," had turned the chapel into something holy. Jack took one step toward Emily, then stopped. He didn't dare come closer. Didn't dare hurt her again. Didn't dare touch her like he once did. He lifted a hand, then halted halfway, fingers trembling. No touching. No demanding. No pulling her back. Just a hand offered, giving her the right to choose the path of her own life. Sunlight washed over that outstretched hand, making it look like the hand of a man begging not for forgiveness, but for a chance to earn it. Emily looked at that hand. Then into his eyes. And in Jack's eyes, she found no excuses. No pretty, "I'm sorry." No, "I'm here to take you back." Only the raw, earnest truth of a man willing to spend the rest of his life making amends. Her heart tightened. She felt it beating again, weak, but alive, as if it had been asleep all this time, smothered by darkness. Victor took half a step forward, voice low and sharpened with threat. "Emily, come here." Don't let his sweet words. Emily didn't hear him. Or maybe, for the first time in months, she simply refused to let anyone else decide her future. Wind seeped through the chapel's cracks, lifting her veil and trembling the hem of her dress. The bouquet in her hands quivered gently. She tightened her grip on it one last time, and then Emily let it fall. The bouquet hit the wooden floor with a soft thud that echoed like a confession. Wildflower petals scattered across the aisle, like fate exhaling after holding its breath too long. A quiet gasp escaped Aunt Martha. She covered her mouth, tears swelling in her eyes. Emily moved forward, one step, then another. Each step trembled not from fear, but from the weight of stepping out of a life forced upon her, and into a life she was choosing for herself. When she stood a breath away from Jack, she lifted her face. Her voice was soft, but it filled the chapel like a prayer. Love has no timing, only the courage to step toward it. Jack staggered, as if the words struck directly into his chest. Tears flooded his eyes, but he smiled a small, trembling smile of a man who had found something he thought he'd lost forever. He didn't pull her into his arms, didn't rush to claim her. He simply brought his hand a little closer, waiting for her to touch him first. Emily looked at that hand for a long, breathless moment, then placed her own into it. Her hand was soft, cold, and came alive the moment it met his. A collective hush swept through the chapel, not silence of shock, but the profound quiet of people who knew they were witnessing a love imperfect, mistimed, yet brave enough to return. Victor froze like a statue, face darkening with fury. But no one looked at him anymore. Every eye was on the two hands clasped in the middle of the chapel, bathed in golden light, surrounded by fallen wildflowers. Emily had chosen, not with vows, not with ceremony, but with a heart that had never stopped loving, and with steps that carried her toward the man who came late, but not too late for love. Sunset draped the chapel porch in a soft, honey-gold glow. A gentle valley breeze lifted the hem of Emily's dress and brushed against Jack's hat brim, casting a shared shadow before them. They stood side by side, saying nothing. But the silence no longer hurt. It was warm, calm, like the last ray of day refusing to disappear. Jack looked at Emily, the woman who had waited for him, hurt because of him, and still found the strength to choose him. Emily looked toward the valley where red dust curled in the wind like a reminder that the West is never gentle. Yet somehow, love still arrived. The last glimmer of sunlight slid over their joined hands. Emily leaned her head on Jack's shoulder. Jack drew in a deep breath, as if sealing this moment inside him, holding it tight, holding it real. And the storyteller's voice drifted in, soft but steady. In the Wild West, people arrive late in each other's lives. Late because of fear. Late because of guilt. Late because they think they don't deserve love. But love isn't measured in hours. Love is measured in honesty and in the courage to step forward even when the past is full of scars. Cowboys aren't perfect. They aren't good with words. They don't promise beautifully. They don't know how to beg. They only know how to love with what's rough and real, with the bravery to face their own mistakes, with the willingness to change for the ones they care for. And when they love with redemption and kindness, quietly, deeply, to the bone. Emily looked up, eyes calm, no tears, only peace. Jack squeezed her hand gently. A promise not perfect, but true. The promise of a man who had come late and would never leave again. The valley wind whispered. The chapel bell rang once. Red Valley held its breath to protect this fragile, beautiful moment. Then the storyteller calls out. If you believe love is never too late, leave a comment and rate this story from 0 to 10. And don't forget to follow the channel for more healing tales from the Wild West. Wild West US, the soul of this story. Cowboys love through redemption. Second chances right in the West. Love that saves a man from himself. In the last gold of sunset, Jack and Emily stood together, two imperfect hearts that found their way back to each other in a harsh land. And sometimes, that is all love needs to be.
He found peace, not by forgetting his past, but by forgiving